I never thought my life would end so suddenly. It was an ordinary afternoon, chores finished, the sun dipping low in the sky when pain gripped my chest like a vice. My breath grew shallow, my vision dimmed, and I felt the strength drain from my body. I collapsed, and in those final moments of awareness, I realized I was slipping from this world. People rushed around me, their voices panicked, but it was too late. My heart gave way, and I died. What happened next was unlike anything words can truly capture. I rose out of my body, floating above the scene, watching as hands pressed against my chest, trying desperately to pull me back. But I was no longer tied to that shell on the floor. I felt light, free, as if I had shed the weight of gravity itself. Then came the light. It was not the harsh brightness of the sun, but a warm, living radiance that drew me in. It pulsed with love, yet with a power that made me tremble. I could feel that whoever was at the center of that light knew me completely, every thought, every failure, every hidden longing of my soul. I was being summoned, and I could not resist. As I drifted forward, the world behind me faded, and eternity opened before me. And then, in the midst of that overwhelming brightness, a voice spoke. It was not like any earthly voice I had ever heard, neither male nor female, but eternal, echoing through me like thunder and music all at once. You have come before me, and I will show you what is to come. I trembled as those words wrapped around me. I had died, but death was not the end. It was the doorway into a reality more real than anything I had ever known. And in that moment, I sensed that what I was about to see was not just for me, but for my nation, for my people, for the days ahead. The light drew me deeper, and suddenly the world unfolded beneath me like a vast living map. I could see cities glowing in the night, rivers winding like silver threads, and crowds of people rushing about with worry etched on their faces. America stretched out before me, not as I had ever seen it on a map, but alive, trembling, restless. Then the voice came again, firm and unshakable. You see your nation, divided and shaking. Its people have placed their trust in men, in wealth, in power. But the time of testing is here. As those words rang out, I saw chaos ripple across the land. Arguments raged in homes, churches split over politics, families torn apart by anger. And then the vision sharpened, focusing on one man, a figure everyone recognized, whose very name stirred either love or hatred: Donald Trump. He stood tall in the vision, yet I could see shadows gathering around him, a countdown ticking like a clock striking its final hours. The voice thundered again, so clear that it pierced through me. By the end of this month, Trump will be no more. His season is finished, his time will end. Men rise and men fall, but I remain. The words struck me with such force that I could hardly breathe. It wasn't spoken with malice, but with authority, like a decree already written. I felt the weight of history in those words, as if heaven itself had stamped an ending. My heart trembled. I knew the world below would erupt when this came to pass. Some would mourn, some would celebrate, but few would understand the truth. The fate of nations does not rest in one man's hands. It rests in the hands of the living king. The light grew brighter, pulling me closer still, as if to show me even more. I knew I was about to see not just a man's destiny, but the destiny of a people who had forgotten where true power lies. The light swelled around me, and the vision changed. I was no longer looking only at Trump, but at the entire nation. I saw living rooms where televisions flickered with breaking news. I saw streets erupting with protests, flags waving wildly in anger and confusion. Some fell to their knees in tears, others shouted in celebration, but all were shaken. America convulsed like a body struck by sudden shock. Then I saw the churches. Some wept, praying fervently, yet others seemed lost, as if the foundation of their faith had crumbled with the fall of a man. Arguments filled the pews, and I could hear voices saying, "What do we do now? Who will save us?" It was then that the voice of the king broke through, echoing with grief and power. Have they forgotten? Salvation does not come from men. Hope does not rest in presidents or kings. I alone am the rock that cannot be shaken. Behind the scenes of these earthly reactions, I was shown something even more terrifying, a spiritual battle raging in unseen realms. Dark figures danced and shouted, rejoicing at the chaos, feeding off the fear. They whispered lies into the ears of millions. Now it's over. Now you are lost. Now your hope is gone. And the people believed them, clinging to despair. But then I saw another army, vast and radiant, clothed in white, their swords gleaming with fire. They pressed back against the darkness, their voices raised in songs of praise to the king. Every time they sang his name, the darkness shrieked and recoiled. The battle was fierce, but I knew without a doubt that victory belonged to the light. In that moment, I understood. Trump's fall was not the true test. The true test was how the people would respond. Would they crumble into hopelessness, or would they lift their eyes to the living king? The voice thundered again. I am shaking this nation, not to destroy it, but to turn its eyes back to me. I trembled as I watched. The vision was not just about one man's end, it was about the heart of an entire people being laid bare. The visions of America and the swirling chaos faded, and I was drawn deeper into the light. My soul trembled, for I knew I was approaching the very source of the voice that had spoken to me. And then I saw him, the king. I could not lift my eyes fully, for his radiance was too great. His robe was like fire and snow at once, purity blazing beyond comprehension. Around him, colors danced that do not exist on earth, and a sound like rivers and thunder filled the air. Yet his presence was not crushing. It was love itself, fierce and holy, but tender enough to draw me closer without fear. I fell to my knees, undone, whispering from the depths of my soul, Lord, I am nothing, yet you brought me here. And he spoke, his voice like 1,000 waters, yet as intimate as a whisper in my ear. You trembled when you heard of a man's end, but I tell you, men's lives are but a breath. The rise and fall of rulers are like shadows at sunset. Only I remain. I wept, for his words struck truth into me. How many times had I, and countless others, looked to leaders as if they were the answer, as if their survival determined our own. Yet here, in his presence, I knew. No ruler on earth could compare to the authority of the king who conquered death. Then he lifted his hand, and I saw again the vision of Trump, the shadow falling over him. And the king declared, by the end of this month, his place will be no more. But remember, this is not about the death of one man. It is about the idols of a nation. They must learn that their hope cannot rest on mortals. They must turn back to me. His words burned into me like fire, not cruel but purifying. I realized then that my encounter was not meant for me alone. It was a message, one I was being charged to carry. A message America would desperately need to hear when the storm broke. I bowed my head and whispered, trembling, what shall I say when I return? And he answered, tell them, I am the living king. Men die, nations fall, but my kingdom cannot be shaken. As I knelt before the king, the light around him shifted, and suddenly I was being shown another vision. It wasn't of America this time, it was of eternity itself. Before me stretched 2 roads, and the king's voice guided me as I watched. The first road was wide and crowded. Multitudes walked upon it, clutching banners with the names of men. Some carried the faces of presidents and rulers, others bore symbols of wealth, power, or fame. They walked with confidence, proud of their allegiances, certain that they were on the right path. But as the road stretched onward, I saw it grow darker. At its end yawned a pit, a chasm of fire and despair. The people cried out in shock when they reached it, but it was too late. They had built their hope on mortals, and they fell with them. The second road was narrow, and far fewer chose it. Those who walked there carried no banners of men, no symbols of earthly kingdoms. Their hands were lifted upward, and their eyes were fixed on the king. Their path was harder, steeper, filled with trials. But at its end was glory, the throne I had just seen, radiant and eternal. And when they reached it, they were embraced, not rejected. Their faces shone with joy, and they sang in voices that shook the heavens. The king's voice thundered with authority. Every soul must choose. Those who cling to men will share their fate, but those who cling to me will live forever. Do not build on sand, for the house will fall. Build on the rock, and you will endure. I wept as I watched the crowds on the wide road. So many of them looked like people I knew, neighbors, family, even churchgoers, who thought their faith was secure because they had tied it to politics or personalities. I wanted to shout to them, to warn them, to pull them back, but I could only watch as the path carried them forward. Then the king looked at me, and his eyes pierced through my soul. Tell them this. The days ahead will shake every idol. Men will fall, nations will crumble, but my kingdom will remain. They must decide now where their allegiance lies. The vision of the two roads faded, and suddenly I was lifted higher, as though carried on unseen wings. Below me, the whole earth spread out like a living globe. I saw nations, borders, oceans, and people moving about like rivers of humanity. And then it began the shaking. It started in America. The moment Trump's shadow was removed, a tremor rippled through the land. The ground beneath its people shook, not physically at first, but spiritually. Fear gripped millions. Some fell to their knees in despair, crying out because the leader they clung to was gone. Others shouted with wild celebration, mocking and jeering. But beneath both the sorrow and the joy was the same truth. They were unsettled, shaken to their core. The king's voice thundered. Do you see how fragile their foundations are? When one man falls, their world collapses. But my kingdom cannot be shaken. From America, the tremors spread outward like waves across the oceans. I saw other nations react. Some laughed at America's downfall. Some trembled at the instability, and some sought to rise in power. But everywhere, the shaking revealed the same thing, people clinging to leaders and governments as if they could save them, forgetting the one who rules above all. And then I saw the earth itself groan. Storms rose, fires raged, and wars stirred at the edges of the map. It was as if creation itself was convulsing, echoing the words I had already heard. Men are but a breath. I alone remain. The king's hand stretched out, and I saw two kinds of people emerge during the shaking. One group stumbled, their eyes darting in panic, desperately searching for new leaders, new idols, new sources of hope. They were like houses built on sand, collapsing in the storm. The other group knelt in prayer, their eyes fixed upward. Though the storm raged around them, they stood firm, like houses built on rock. Their peace was unexplainable, their strength unshakable. The king spoke again, and his words seared into me like fire. The shaking will not stop until every false foundation falls. I am allowing it, not to destroy, but to purify. Tell them, cling to men, and you will fall. Cling to me, and you will endure. I trembled as I watched. The rumor of Trump's end was not an isolated event. It was a spark that would ignite a shaking far greater. A shaking meant to test every heart and every nation. As the vision of nations faded, I felt myself standing once more before the king. His eyes, burning with both love and truth, fixed on me, and I knew he was about to show me something deeply personal. The light around him softened, and suddenly I saw myself, my own body, lying motionless on the ground where I had fallen. I watched as people knelt beside me, their faces pale with fear, their hands pressing against my chest, crying out for me to return. My soul trembled. I knew I had crossed the threshold of death, yet the king was giving me a choice, to remain in his presence or to return with a message. And then his voice came, heavier than thunder but tender as a whisper. You have seen what is to come. You have heard my decree. But what good is the vision if it dies with you? Return, speak, warn them, tell them the truth. Tears streamed down my face as I realized the weight of what he was entrusting to me. I felt unworthy. I was just one woman, simple and unknown. How could I carry such a message to a world that mocks, denies, and dismisses the things of God? Yet his gaze did not waver, and in his presence I felt both small and chosen. Then he showed me a glimpse of my future. I saw myself waking up in a hospital bed, weak but alive. I saw my family gathered, their eyes wide with both relief and awe as I spoke my first words. I saw him. I saw the king. I saw myself sharing the vision, not just with them, but with others, people who doubted, people who mocked, people who desperately needed hope. Some rejected the message, but others fell to their knees, their hearts pierced by the truth. The king's voice echoed one final time. Do not fear their faces. Do not soften the warning. Tell them, Trump's days are numbered, but the living king reigns forever. Men will die, but my word does not die. Tell them to prepare. I bowed my head, trembling under the weight of his words. I knew then that my return would not be easy. This message would stir anger in some and hope in others. But obedience was the only path, and in that instant, I felt myself pulled backward, away from the light, away from his presence. My heart ached with longing, but I knew my mission was not complete. The pull was sudden, like being swept by a rushing tide. The light faded, the heavenly music dimmed, and the weight of flesh pressed heavily upon me once more. My chest ached as air was forced back into my lungs, and I felt the pounding of hands on me, desperate to restart my heart. Then, with a gasp that tore through the silence, I returned. I opened my eyes, and the faces around me blurred with tears of relief. Voices cried out, "She's back! She's breathing!" But my spirit still trembled with the weight of what I had just seen. I could not stay silent. My lips moved, cracked and weak, but my words spilled out with urgency. Listen. I saw him. I saw the king. By the end of this month, Trump will be no more. His time is finished. But this is not about one man, it's about us. Men die, but the living king reigns forever. The room fell silent. Some stared at me in disbelief. Others leaned closer, shaken by the trembling conviction in my voice. I knew many would doubt, some would mock, but I had carried the message faithfully. I had seen eternity. I had heard the decree. Days passed, and as I regained strength, the vision replayed in my mind, over and over the wide road of those who trusted in men, the narrow road of those who trusted in the king, the shaking of nations, and the army of radiant worshippers standing unshaken in the storm. Each time I remembered, the same fire burned in me. This message was not mine to keep. It was a warning, a call, a plea. Now I testify with all that I am. I died, and I saw what is coming. The world trembles at the fall of leaders, but the king reminded me salvation was never in their hands. Nations may crumble, rulers may vanish, but his throne is eternal. And so I live with this truth carved into my soul. Prepare your heart, not for the rise or fall of men, but for the return of the living king.